Welcome to Key Tech. Please describe this channel if you are interested in today's video. Chip companies in mainland China are growing rapidly. SMIC has become the world's third largest chip foundry. Under the Chinese chip offensive, TSMC, which has advanced technology, has not been affected, while the second largest chip foundry, Samsung, has suffered a major blow and has recently reported the closure of some production lines. TSMC and Samsung are undoubtedly the first chip foundries, but the technological gap between the two sides has actually widened since 5 nanometers. Samsung's 5 nanometer process transistor density is only slightly higher than TSMC's 7 nanometer EUV, but far behind TSMC's 5 nanometers. TSMC and Samsung are the only two chip foundries in the world that mass-produce 3 nanometer processes. Technically speaking, Samsung's 3 nanometer process is still slightly ahead, but Samsung's 3 nanometer process is deeply troubled by yield problems. It is reported that after a year of hard work, it has only increased to 20%, while TSMC's 3 nanometer process has increased to more than 80%. In this case, Samsung can no longer compete with TSMC in processes below 7 nanometers. One of its major customers, Qualcomm, has left Samsung. Qualcomm's Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 uses Samsung's 4 nanometers process, improved from 5 nanometers, but has heating problems. Later, Qualcomm switched Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 to TSMC's 4 nanometers process, and the main frequency was further increased, while the power consumption decreased, proving that Samsung's 5 nanometers process is indeed inferior to TSMC's 5 nanometers process. With the departure of Qualcomm, the previously rumored news that AMD and Nvidia intend to give some orders to Samsung has also come to nothing, and TSMC has won a great victory. At present, Samsung's 3 nanometers process should not have any customers, and 5 nanometers has caused a large number of customers to lose with the departure of Qualcomm, which has led to a serious overcapacity of Samsung's 5 nanometers and 3 nanometers processes and has to close some production lines. So why is it said that the development of Chinese chips has also led to Samsung's chip overcapacity? The development of Chinese chips has a multifaceted impact on Samsung. The direct aspect is that Chinese chip foundries and Samsung are competing for mature process orders. In terms of mature processes, chip foundries in mainland China have lower costs. Therefore, not only do local chip companies in mainland China hand over their chips to SMIC for foundry, but some overseas chip companies also hand over their orders to SMIC and other foundries. After all, the chip industry is now highly competitive and needs to reduce costs. The indirect reason is that China's chip self-sufficiency rate continues to rise. In 2023, China's chip self-sufficiency rate has increased to more than 30%. China is also the world's largest chip purchasing country. As China's chip self-sufficiency rate rises, China has reduced its chip purchases year after year, which has led to inventory problems for overseas chip companies, and overseas chips have to reduce orders. This has led to overcapacity in mature process production capacity of Samsung, UMC, GlobalFoundries, Powerchip, etc. From last year to the beginning of this year, these chip foundries have already had overcapacity problems. In order to compete for orders, they have cut prices by 10% to 20%. It can be seen how much impact the increase in China's chip self-sufficiency rate has brought to them. Under such circumstances, Samsung is facing overcapacity from advanced processes to mature processes. Samsung's share of the global chip foundry market has dropped from the previous peak of 20% to 13% today. The maintenance cost of chip production lines is extremely high. In order to reduce operating costs, Samsung has to close some production lines. It can be seen from this that China has developed its own chip industry, which has an increasing impact on the world. As Samsung begins to reduce production capacity, TSMC will sooner or later face overcapacity in mature processes. It will have to rely more on the income brought by advanced processes. However, due to its unique advantages in advanced processes, TSMC now requires an increase in the foundry price of advanced processes, but there is no price increase in mature processes. In summary, SMIC has risen and TSMC is ahead of Samsung. China's chip self-sufficiency rate has increased, resulting in Samsung's chip overcapacity and the closure of some production lines. TSMC relies on advanced process income to increase foundry prices, and mature processes have not increased prices. On November 1, the latest report from the Korean media said that Samsung Electronics Semiconductor Division is temporarily shutting down its foundry, contract manufacturing, production lines to reduce costs. Analysts estimate that the chipmaker's foundry business recorded a loss of up to 1 trillion won in the third quarter, prompting the company to take measures to cut costs by shutting down some production lines. People familiar with the matter revealed that Samsung Electronics has shut down more than 30% of the 4nm, 5nm, and 7nm wafer foundry production lines on Line 2, P2, and Line 3, P3, in Pyeongtaek, and plans to expand the shutdown to about 50% by the end of the year. The company intends to gradually stop operations while monitoring customer orders. The decision reflects Samsung's efforts to reduce operating costs. As Samsung gradually shuts down some wafer foundry production lines, it will inevitably lay off employees on the corresponding production lines. On November 4, Samsung Electronics executives recently revealed that an unprecedented 4L large-scale voluntary retirement plan will be implemented, especially for the wafer foundry manufacturing team that continues to lose money, and the 8-inch foundry manufacturing and technology team will lay off more than 30%. With the large-scale restructuring to cut costs, old equipment cannot be ignored. South Korean media said that it is expected that the legacy lines in South Korea will undergo large-scale operation rate adjustments and labor adjustments. It is reported that the top management has stated that Chinese factories are no exception.